kombucha squash here, which is also called Japanese pumpkin. What is nice about this squash, for those of you who have diabetes or pre-diabetes, it is the carbohydrates, the starches in this is actually about half of what it is on some of the other squashes, and so it's a nice choice. So what we're going to be doing today is showing you how to roast and share some recipes for some soups. Okay, so you might be wondering, how are we going to tackle this squash? And with some of the squash, you can cut it in half and peel it and scoop it, but the easiest way with larger squash and butternut squash is that you would roast it whole, and what you would need to do is you take a sharp knife and we're just going to cut some holes in it, which will allow the steam to escape. And just be careful because this is quite solid and you don't want to have any casualties in the kitchen and need to go to the emergency room. So easily peel the rind off and scoop out the seeds. And so you can also just put some olive oil on it. And now I just like putting spices on anything that I'm going to roast because it really brings out the flavors. And so now these will be ready for a 425-degree oven. So it's been 30 minutes, so we want to check our squash to turn it to make sure that it browns evenly. And so a way of checking to see if it's done is that you would insert a fork, and this one entered smoothly, but that one did not. So I would turn it over and we'll keep it in, but not for that much longer. I thought it would take an hour, but because they're small, maybe it'll only be 45 minutes. This one is much firmer. Yeah, one might be done before the other one. So this one is at 425 as opposed to the other vegetables that we had done, which is 400. So the timer went off. It's been 15 minutes, so we need to check our squash to see if it is ready to take out. And so again, you use your fork to see how it goes in so smoothly. So this one is definitely done. And the other one was a little bit firmer, but yet this goes in so nicely. And so what I will do now is just make these the right side up again. And then we'll let this cool down a bit, and then you'll learn how to peel and de-seed a squash. Remember these very firm squash that we had that no one really wanted to cut into because we were afraid we would hurt ourselves? So let's see how things happen now. I'll try cutting it in half. Look at that. It's much easier. Because a lot of the recipes say peel the rind, and it is just so difficult. So what you can do is get a spoon. Make sure you have your trash bowl. Unless you wanted to do something with these seeds, you most definitely can roast them. It does take time to get off the sticky material that will keep them all together. But I have done that. It does take time, but we won't do that today because I have to have our camera person and my helper get home before midnight. So this is just so much simpler. And I would try and remove the darker color that you see, because that still is with this stringy material that keeps all the seeds intact. And talk about removing the skin. Butternut squash does this the same way. It's just so much easier, but that might have some good meat, good, you know, squash meat on it. And so you could use the squash meat. We're going to be using it in soup, but for those of you who like to make pumpkin bread, you can definitely do that. And you can always make a different kind of squash bread, which I'm sure will taste just as good as the pumpkin bread. Okay, now that we've removed most of the seeds, so then you can just scoop it out. And what we're planning on doing is you can cut it into cubes, but I don't even think we need to do that. It's just so nice and soft. So why don't I just put it into this bowl? And I mean, you can puree it in a blender, but if you don't have a blender, I think if you just mash it with a fork, this will do the same job. Okay, so I'm going to do that with the rest of the squash.
So you'll put your soup pan or your soup bowl onto the stove and then turn the heat on. And then once it has a good heat, then you'll add the oil and then let the oil heat up. And you can tell the oil's at the proper temperature once it has a little bit of a glisten. And so we just put it on right now. So it'll take a little, about a minute or two for it to heat up before we can put the oil on.
And for those of you who didn't catch the other video when we talked about olive oil, it's just so healthy for you. It helps increase the absorption of all of the nutrients and vitamins and minerals from the vegetables that you eat. The other thing about olive oil is that it will improve your protective cholesterol, the HDL. It helps it move back and forth in the body, so that what HDL does is it removes the plaque and the other deposits in your arteries and brings it back to the liver to be chemically changed. And so if there's a way that we can increase that HDL and its movement, that's healthy for you if you have heart disease or high cholesterol. So does it feel warm? Okay, want to get started. There you go.
So now that it's got the heat, we can go ahead and add the oil and just cover a little bit of the bottom with the oil. And the oil helps you to cook like the onions and things at a little bit higher temperature without it burning, and it also helps your onions to get a little bit of a brown to them and bring out some of the flavor of the onions. And so we just added the oil, and now we'll give it about a minute or two for the oil to get to the temperature of the rest of the pan. And so once it gets a little bit of that glisten, then we can go ahead and start cooking. And it seems like it's got a little smoking a little bit too, so we just turn the heat down a little bit because you don't want it to be at that smoking point of the oil. And so whenever it seems like it's ready, you can get a couple sprinkles of water and throw it in there. And if it kind of sizzles back at you, then that's a good sign that it's at the right temperature. So that's a good temperature, and we can go ahead and add the onions. Yeah, and so we're just adding the onions to get the good base, and then we'll add the other spices, the garlic and the cumin for the soup that we're doing.
I'm just going to add a little pinch of salt because it will bring out more of the flavors of the onion. And for those of you who have high blood pressure and are concerned about the amount of salt that you're putting in your dishes, if you compare a homemade soup with one that you might buy, the salt content is so much higher in processed food. In fact, when they look at what people eat, really only 5% of your daily salt intake is from home cooked meals. It's much, you get much more of your salt with the added salt at the table and with processed foods.
And then for the onions, once they're cooked, they'll have like a little bit of a clear appearance or translucent, and so that's when you know that they've been fully cooked. It usually takes at least about 5 to 10 minutes or so, and then that's when you can go ahead and add the other spices like the garlic and the cumin once the onions have that kind of clear appearance or a little bit of a golden appearance. We took out half of the onions and the spices from the pot, and we're going to use that in the mixture with the squash, the beans, and the tomatoes, and then blend it all together. And so the beans that we use were just canned beans, and so whenever you're buying canned vegetables, it's important to look at the back to see how much salt or sodium is in them. And if you have high blood pressure, then maybe you'll want to look at the back and find one of the cans that has lower sodium in it as well too. So, and then we'll go ahead and add all the squash. Thanks. And then we'll add half of our spices. So this is already half, so we're just going to put the whole bowl in. And then we'll add half of the beans. There, that looks about half. And then with the pureed tomatoes, we'll go ahead and add all those to this as well. Okay. Now it's all in there, so we can go ahead and blend it. Go ahead and add it back to the soup pot that has the remaining spices.
And the reason that we puree just half of the beans is that it's more for texture, so that half of your beans are still going to be whole, so it will provide that crunch appeal. And then you add the rest of the beans, and then 3 cups of the broth.
And then like we've said in some of the other recipes too, if you like your soup a little bit thicker, then you can just maybe add 1 cup or 2 cups as opposed to having to add all 3. Alright, there's 1. And so we'll go ahead and stir that in and look at the consistency of it. I think it needs another one.
Yeah. I think the group here likes more thicker soups, so we may be putting less of the broth in the recipes, but in the written recipes that are available, we'll give the approximations of what you can try. And then the next step is to bring that to a boil over high heat. And again, once it's boiling, then that's when you turn it down to just a small simmer, and then you would cover it, and in 20 minutes check it to see if you feel that the flavorings are good, if the beans are soft enough for your palate, and then we'll taste test and add some other additional ingredients. Is it taste test time?
It is, and so it's already been cooking for about 20 minutes or so.
And just to let full disclosure, I thought this recipe was a good one to add some turmeric. Turmeric is a root spice very similar to ginger. It doesn't have an overpowering flavor, but it's a nice addition to soups and stews because turmeric is an anti-inflammatory spice. And what I mean with regards to that, if you have aches and pains and you're using Tylenol or ibuprofen, you can use turmeric in its place. But turmeric is not absorbed well from the GI tract, so you need to put some black pepper in it. So we are testing this, and it needs pop.
Yeah.
It needs to have something pop out at you. And so your options are, you can put in lemon juice. This recipe suggested red wine vinegar, 2 tablespoons. So let's add that.
And what the acidic food does is it helps kind of break down some of the tastes and flavors. And so instead of just adding salt, if there's not enough flavor, you can add something acidic, either like the vinegar or like lemon juice, and that can really help kind of break down the flavors and make it pop as opposed to just adding salt. I'll go ahead and stir it in and then taste test again.
And what I really like is that there's the whole beans in here, because flavor is sight, it's smell. As soon as your eyes see a dish, your salivary glands start to just make your mouth so watery. And so for this to have something soft and then the firmness of the beans, it's a nice contrast. And so did that make it pop enough? An improvement.
Yeah. It was hot.
It is. It is, it's hot. I don't think we really added much salt to it. Because I think we just did the cumin.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Use that one. Use that one. And I might even add another half a tablespoon of the vinegar. But the black pepper that we added to that, I tasted that bite in my taste test. So. See, I like this better.
Yeah.
Very good.
Pops.
All right, so finished product. Here you go. Nice for these winter time in Arizona.